The house had been empty for years, though it didn't feel abandoned. When Clara stepped through the door of her late grandmother's cottage, the scent of lavender and dust greeted her like a memory too old to forget. The air held warmth despite the stillness, as if the walls remembered laughter, music, and the low hum of stories whispered over tea. She hadn't been back since she was a teenager. Life had taken her far, a city job, a string of unfinished relationships, and an ache she couldn't name. But when her grandmother's lawyer called about the inheritance, she knew she had to come. The cottage stood on the edge of a quiet town in Maine, surrounded by lilacs and wild ivy. Her grandmother, Evelyn, had lived there nearly her whole life. The rooms were frozen in time, floral wallpaper peeling softly at the corners, porcelain teacups aligned perfectly on the shelf, a rocking chair facing the window. Clara wandered from room to room, tracing her fingers along the furniture, remembering small things. The way Evelyn always hummed while cooking, the smell of apple pie, the way she'd say, "Love doesn't end, Clara. It just changes form." That evening, while unpacking boxes in the attic, Clara stumbled upon a small wooden chest under an old quilt. Its brass latch was tarnished but still firm. When she opened it, she found a stack of yellowed envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon. Each one was written in the same elegant cursive, her grandmother's handwriting, and addressed to Thomas Whitaker. Clara frowned. She didn't recognize the name. The letters were postmarked from decades ago, some before her mother was even born. Curiosity prickled her skin. She hesitated, then untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated June 12, 1961. "My dearest Thomas, I heard the train today and thought of you. The sound always feels like goodbye, even when no one is leaving. I hope you are well, and that the city hasn't swallowed you whole. The garden is blooming again, though I miss the way you used to tease me about the roses. Always yours, E." Clara's heart quickened. Her grandmother had always been private, never speaking of any man other than her late husband, Harold, a quiet, gentle man who had passed when Clara was a child. But these letters felt different. There was tenderness here, longing, and there were dozens more. Over the next few days, Clara read them all. The story unfolded piece by piece, two young lovers separated by circumstance. Evelyn had met Thomas one summer before she married Harold. He'd been a teacher in town, kind and idealistic. They'd fallen deeply, quietly in love. But something, Clara wasn't sure what, had come between them. In the final letter, Evelyn wrote, "I cannot see you again, Thomas. What we had will stay between the stars and the sea. If you ever think of me, know that I kept the memory safe. Evelyn." Clara closed the last envelope and sat in silence. She could almost feel her grandmother's heart beating between the lines, the ache of what might have been. That night, she couldn't sleep. The letters haunted her. Who was Thomas Whitaker? Was he still alive? A quick search online brought up a few names. One in particular stood out. Thomas Whitaker, 84, retired schoolteacher, Camden, Maine. Her pulse fluttered. It was only a few hours' drive from the cottage. The next morning, after pacing and debating and telling herself she was being ridiculous, Clara got in her car and drove north. The town was small and quaint, with an old library, a bakery that smelled like cinnamon, and a harbor glittering with light. She asked around, and eventually found his address, a modest white house by the sea. Her hands trembled as she knocked. After a moment, the door opened. An elderly man with soft grey eyes and a cane stood there, looking curious but kind. "Can I help you, miss?" She hesitated. "Are you Thomas Whitaker?" "I am," he said slowly. "Do I know you?" "No," she said, voice unsteady. "But I think you knew my grandmother, Evelyn Carter." For a moment, his face went still. Then something in his eyes shifted, recognition, sorrow, wonder. "Evelyn," he murmured, the name like a prayer. My God. She was everything. Clara swallowed hard. "I found your letters. In her attic." He nodded, eyes glistening. "She wrote them. I never saw them." She blinked. "You never." He shook his head gently. "I wrote her, too. Every month. For years. I suppose, My letters never reached her. Or maybe she couldn't bear to answer. He looked past her toward the sea. We were young, and the world was smaller then. Circumstances, well, they have a way of rewriting lives. They sat on his porch for hours. He told her how he'd met Evelyn at a summer fair, how she'd been wearing a blue dress and a daisy in her hair, how they'd walked home together under the same stars every night for a season. But Evelyn's parents had arranged her engagement to Harold, a good man, solid and steady. Thomas had been poor, with no family name to offer. She had chosen security, not love. And yet, he said, his heart had never truly moved on. As the sun dipped low, Clara handed him the bundle of letters. His hands trembled as he took them. I never thought I'd see her words, he whispered. After all this time. She never forgot you, Clara said softly. She kept these safe her whole life. Tears welled in his eyes. Then that's enough for me. He invited her inside for tea. The house was filled with books and photographs. A life lived quietly, gently. On the mantel sat a small painting of a woman in a blue dress by the sea. Clara knew it instantly. She painted this, she said, touching the frame. She did, he said. She gave it to me the summer before she left. The realization hit her like a wave. So she did see you again. He smiled faintly. Once. To say goodbye. When Clara drove back to the cottage that night, the moon followed her all the way home. The letters felt lighter now, as if their story had finally found its ending. Over the next few weeks, she began restoring the house, fixing loose boards, painting the shutters, planting new roses in the garden. But she left the attic untouched. It had become sacred, a bridge between past and present. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Dear Clara, thank you for bringing Evelyn back to me, even for a moment. Her words were like hearing her voice again after all these years. She once told me she believed love never dies. It just changes form. I see now that she was right. Warmly, Thomas. Clara placed the letter on the mantel beside one of Evelyn's old photographs, the one where she was laughing, sunlight catching her hair. The house felt different now, alive again. Love, she realized, was everywhere here, in the scent of roses, in the creak of the floorboards, in the quiet hum of memory. That evening, Clara stood in the garden as the wind moved through the lilacs. She closed her eyes and imagined Evelyn as a young woman, running barefoot through the grass, Thomas waiting by the gate. It wasn't a tragic story anymore, not really. It was unfinished, yes, but beautifully so. A promise stretched across time. Weeks turned into months. Clara decided to stay in the cottage. She started writing again, short stories, then longer ones. She found her voice in the echoes of her grandmother's past. Sometimes she'd visit Thomas, and they'd talk about Evelyn, not as a ghost, but as someone who still existed in both of them.